After the Latins retreat from a fight, Turnus goes to the king and asks Latinus to allow him to fight Aeneas one-on-one to determine the outcome of the battle. If Turnus is victorious, the authority of the Latins will be confirmed, but if Aeneas defeats him, then the Trojan wins Lavinia. The king believes that it would be a good idea for Turnus to fight to decide the outcome, since he was the cause of the conflict. However, he worries about the backlash he could face from the Rutulians if their king is killed. Turnus, hoping to win additional fame and glory, remains adamant that he should fight, but Queen Amata begs Turnus to change his mind, as she is afraid to leave the outcome of the struggle in his hands. She is willing to take her own life rather than become a slave of the Trojans or witness the loss of her throne. Lavinia begins to cry, which enrages Turnus, who definitively decides to fight. Meanwhile, Aeneas receives word of Turnus's proposal and happily ratifies the peace. The next day, Aeneas and Turnus set up altars for the gods beneath the Latin walls, and the opposing armies march out and meet on the field. Many townspeople watch the proceedings from the gates, walls, and roofs of the city. Meanwhile, Juno visits Juturna, Turnus' sister, a nymph who had an affair with Jupiter. Juno warns her that if Turnus fights Aeneas, he will lose. Jupiter has forbidden Juno from interfering directly, but the queen of the gods still harbors a grudge against the Trojans from the judgment of Paris and wants the Latins to defeat the Trojans. She asks Juturna to find a way to violate the truce and change fate. Back at the battlefield, Aeneas meets with King Latinus and Turnus at the altars, and they make a sacrifice to the gods. Aeneas vows that if he loses, the Trojans will drop their claims without further violence. If he wins, Aeneas pledges that the Trojans will not overthrow the Latins. They will become their equals and join together under Latinus' authority. King Latinus prays that nothing will cause the agreement to be broken. Turnus' Rutulians already sense that Turnus will be defeated in battle. Juturna, disguised as the well-respected soldier Commodus, riles up the troops by pointing out that Turnus will die with honor and will win fame, while they will live without glory. Her words are enough to make the Latins eager to fight again. Juturna also creates a fake sign from Jupiter in the sky. An imperial eagle picks up a swan and is then attacked by other birds. Only after it drops the swan is the eagle able to fly away. One of the Latin kings, Tumminus, cries out that the Latins need to fight and throws his lance. The shot kills one of Glypis' sons, and the Trojan army attacks in retaliation. The Latins spring into battle, and King Latinus flees from the fight. Aeneas runs through the battle unprotected and unarmed, calling for the Trojans to stop fighting and respect the vows that had just been made. While he is shouting, however, he is struck by an arrow. Turnus, on the other hand, wastes no time in arming himself, and rides around the battle in his chariot, slaughtering many Trojans, as Menesthius, Achates, and Ascanius protect Aeneas as they retreat back to his tent. Aeneas himself breaks the shaft of the arrow and begs his friends to remove the tip so he can rejoin the fighting. Iapis, a skilled physician, pulls out the remainder of the arrow, and Venus enters the tent and heals Aeneas, who quickly dons his golden armor and rushes back to the field. Before he leaves, he tells Ascanius that when he is old enough to fight, he should remember Aeneas' accomplishments and assert his birthright as the son of Aeneas and nephew of Hector. The reappearance of Aeneas gives the Trojans fresh hope, and they regroup and charge again. Now the Latins are on the retreat, but Aeneas does not pursue any of them. Instead, he calls for Turnus to come and face him. Juturna disguises herself as Turnus' charioteer Metiscus and drives him well away from Aeneas. Then, Messapus attempts to kill Aeneas by impaling him with a javelin, and Aeneas finally becomes enraged enough to join the general battle. Both sides fight valiantly, and each takes heavy losses. After a while of fighting, Venus inspires Aeneas to storm the unguarded town, and Aeneas calls the Trojan chiefs together and tells them to burn the city down. The queen watches as the Trojans attack the city, and she does not see Turnus and his troops, so she assumes he is dead. Amata blames herself for everything that is happening and hangs herself. As Turnus begins to notice the sounds of the Trojans attacking the city, Juturna tells him to ignore them. Finally noticing his sister's trick, Turnus questions why she was so involved and asks her who convinced her to interfere. He claims that her actions have resulted in the deaths of many innocent Latins and that she wants him to run from his fate. Filled with rage and shame, Turnus decides to face Aeneas at last. He calls for the Latins to stop fighting, and the Trojans stop as well. Both armies surround the two heroes. Aeneas and Turnus attempt using javelins first and then meet in hand-to-hand combat. Both take hits. Turnus shatters 2 swords on Aeneas' helmet and shield and then tries to run, but the army's walls and marshes effectively pen him in. Turnus calls to his soldiers to get him another sword, but Aeneas threatens them with severe punishment if any of them help Turnus. Aeneas, slowed somewhat by his wound, chases Turnus around the circle 10 times, but stops as he sees the olive tree where his spear had become stuck earlier. Turnus prays to Faunus and Mother Earth that Aeneas will be unable to pull his spear from the tree, and Juturna returns Turnus' sword to him while disguised as Metiscus. Angered, Venus pulls Aeneas' spear from the tree. In Olympus, Jupiter tells Juno not to interfere with fate anymore. Juno reluctantly agrees to stop helping Turnus and asks Jupiter to allow the Latins to maintain their name, traditions, and language after Aeneas' victory. Jupiter assures her that the Latins will keep their traditions, culture, name, and authority. He then calls one of the Fates to go and scare Juturna away from her brother. The Fate takes the shape of a bird and flies around Turnus. Juturna sees and recognizes it and laments that she cannot die with her brother since she is immortal. She jumps into her stream, crying. As Aeneas and Turnus face off again, Turnus notices an immense rock and picks it up, balancing it on one knee. He tries to throw it at Aeneas, but he falters under its weight and it lands short. Aeneas advances and throws his spear with enough force that it goes through Turnus' shield and armor and lodges itself in his thigh. On the ground, Turnus pleads for mercy so he can see his father again. Aeneas pauses, and after careful consideration, he decides to spare Turnus. Seconds later, however, Aeneas glances down and sees the golden sword belt that Turnus had stolen from Pallas after killing him. His anger renewed, Aeneas stabs Turnus through the chest, dedicating the final blow to Pallas.